Hello guys, in the past I've made a research guide, and you haven't seen that already, you could find a playlist with all of my guides in the description below. Today I want to do a more specific dive into technology in this game, and I want to give you some tips on different research goals you can set. So if you don't know how research goes at all, go check out my technology guide. But if you want to know some researches you should be keeping your eye on and go for, I'm going to point out all the important ones that I personally make note of. And some of these will apply to different nations and different strategies, but you should definitely get some good goals out of this video. So to start, we're going to be looking at military. With military, one thing I do tend to look at pretty early on, or at least early enough to catch my initial wars, is this section right here, this little right half of the leftmost side of martial advances. And the reason why I like to look around here at the beginning is because in the beginning, you don't have access to a lot of civilization everywhere, and AI likes to stack a lot of stuff into one stack. And to counter that, effectively, you'll need to do the same thing at some point. Not all the time, because that's dumb, but at some point. And here we have a lot of really good techs like Logistics Division, Fighting Season, granting supply limit. Skip passes fort maintenance, you get more supply limit. On this side, more supply limit. There's a nice loyalty buff to generals here as well. And if you come down here, there's some Legion maintenance buffs that are useful, more supply limit with a reduction to army attrition, and even the ability to have enemies take attrition. Especially the supply things are what I like to look at early on over here. Early enough, again, for my initial wars. Logistics and fighting right here, these are a must. And then the next two will kind of be my second stage of if I think it's worth it, because this is a 15% supply limit bonus. This is another 15%. And then there's another 10% and 15% over here. This is kind of like stage 3, because you really have to set that up. I usually don't go any further than my little stage 2 right here. This is more for later on. But early on, if you're in a supply small place, but you need big supply for big units, this is good to look at. Additionally, if supply is a problem, it's really easy to just go to the very first tech right here in the middle, and you get an army weight modifier reduction, which is kind of like an inverse. Instead of getting more supply to sustain the weight, you can just reduce the weight by 10%. And this is a real easy one to get for that as well. So early on, if you think you might have problems with total army weight and supply, then this is what you want to go for. That was kind of my first reliable thing I would go for. Now let's look at other things. We're gonna be sticking to military until we get to other sections. So legions are a big thing in this game, and they are a favorite that players like to rush. Now, you don't need to rush cohorts immediately. The reason you would rush cohorts is because you could raise legions freely if you enact the proper law, so from every province. But this is really later in the game. Rome can get this, by the way, and anyone near Rome can get this for free from an event. Not the tech, but the ability to do what the tech allows you to do, minus the 5% discipline buff right here. So that's why you would rush it. But if you're going this path, then you can't even enact that law unless you're a great power. So you need 500 territories just to enact this law once you get this tech. So rushing this is not as good as it might seem, and not as tempting as it should seem, right? Because unless you get the event from like Rome, for example, which will just immediately enact that law and bypass that restriction, you don't want to really try to go for this at all, unless you just really need that extra discipline, or you're about to become a great power. What is way better to go for is professional training here, because this, you'll get 10% more discipline on the way, and discipline in this game is your effectiveness, your skill, your training. This is really good, like a 10%, especially early on. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 points to get down here, and you could start out with 8 innovation points just freely available. So you could get a whole 10% improvement to the discipline of your units. And you can also get the ability to raise a legion from your capital region, which is going to be the best one for you to raise from for a long time, as you take over other cultures that are not integrated, and you have to choose, okay, do we integrate them? Do we start assimilating them? And as you leave your region, like Italia, for example, you're gonna not really have the ability to raise much of any levy or legion there anyway. So if you're really in the mood for legions, professional training is where you want to kind of end it at. Going for Manipular Legion over here is nice potentially for that discipline bonus, but it is more effective to just go over here past that material science I pointed out earlier with the army weight modifier and go for Boethian helmet. Right here is the same exact buff, but it's a little bit more accessible and it leads to something else that is extremely important. But they're both worth picking up if you're being very military heavy. And what's down here that's really worth it is Blacksmith's Apprentices. Blacksmith's Apprentices unlocks the Foundry building. It also gives you heavy infantry cost reduction. This is good if you're making legions. And you get some heavy cavalry discipline along the way, which is extra discipline for specifically heavy cavalry. Good if your culture provides levies with it, or it is somehow a part of your legion composition strategy, but mainly this. In the base game, the Foundry is just like the most important building out of all of them, debatedly. It's right here. It and some other buildings such as Great Temple and Grand Theater need text to unlock them. And this one, I think you might see how this is useful, even if you know very little of the game. So 25% bonus to local tax income. So for that territory. Now imagine if every one of these cities had a foundry, right? 25% bonus to local research points. That's crazy. 5% improved civilization level. This is standard for buildings, and 4 less slaves needed to produce an additional resource that you could then trade off for more money. This is an incredibly powerful building, and I would say it's pretty meta to just spam these as much as possible if you're trying to maximize things like income from trade and taxes and research, because it's one building that does it all. So that is a very important thing to pick up early on for all of those things. There's other ways to get around needing any of that. There's other strategies that would work, certainly, but look at it kind of like a noob tube, but instead of a weapon, it's a building. It's gonna cover all the most important bases by itself. So that is definitely very good to get. And the 4 points, the 4 innovation points that you can get that will lead you down there, 3 of them are going to give incredibly useful things: Material Science, Boethian Helmet, and Blacksmith Apprentices. Scythian Saddles, again, more situational, but 3 out of 4, that's pretty good. A lot of the rest of this has to do with sieging, for example, siege traditions, siege engineers, siege ability, things like that. These can be useful, but they're not so important. There's other ways to get this sort of thing to be better. For example, if you're using a legion, you could just use engineers to accomplish the same thing and put your innovations to more important locations. I'm sure there's a use for this stuff and things that increase your garrison, but I wouldn't recommend rushing it. The only other thing here, other than Blacksmith Apprentices, I would recommend really rushing is right here, Fortified Camps. And this is very situational. This unlocks the earthworks. You can also get some fort defense along the way, but the reason you might want the earthworks, and again, very, very situational, it's this building right here it will unlock. It lowers the combat within a region, which is good because it forces a fight to be very narrow. So if you're in some sort of mountainous area, for example, somewhere like here and here, let's imagine you had cities like in these regions somewhere, or even better yet, like somewhere where there's only one singular territory to pass through, and you put a city here with an earthworks. It would debuff the population capacity that could live there by 10%, but the fort will perform 25% more effectively, even if you stack them. That's just a stacking buff. It will make the enemies attrit there, like just guaranteed, or adding to what they're already attritting. And it will force them to fight in a far more narrow corridor, meaning if you have a smaller force of more elite units, they would stand a better chance against bigger forces, especially if the terrain is advantageous. Like if it's in a mountain or hills or something else that's narrow, then this will help you really narrow the playing field so less units can be in the fight at once. If it's on a farmland, well, it'll help, but it's not going to be that amazing. So location and terrain mean a lot, but this is a very useful thing that you could set a goal to get. Everything else here, again, pretty situational. And speaking of situational, almost everything in here is extremely situational to if you're really even utilizing navies. You could be landlocked, none of this stuff could matter to you. But if you want to buff up your navies, and you can, I mean, there's a war goal in the game that lets you essentially take any province just by blockading your enemies. So navies can be very useful. And that's why you might want to get a navy. However, there's only one thing here that I would really recommend rushing if you want to set a goal for it, and that would be professional sailors. When you go along the way, you'll get some basic ship buffs, some navy maintenance cost reduction, some free librarians you'll probably want to throw away, more discipline. But when you get here, there's some big buffs here that are really, really good. First off, +1 maximum mercenaries army. If you're playing someone like Carthage, this is just a must. You can get more mercenaries. And if you're playing any strategy that gives you a reduction of the cost of mercenaries, or you need to fight enemies way bigger than you, this really helps. Why this is in the ship tree, I don't even know, but this really, really helps. These to the ship starting experience, damage taken, that's not as important. The other thing that makes this very, very useful is actually a law, and laws and stuff are different for every single nation. But for a lot of nations, not Rome as you could see, but for most nations, to get the equivalent of Lex Claudia here, which is the anti-piracy casus belli, you're going to need professional sailors. Not every nation needs it, you see Rome doesn't need it, but most nations will need that technology to get this. And the anti-piracy casus belli basically means that if you, let's see, open up, say either your diplomacy or barbarian power map mode, these little pirate havens, if a pirate haven is located in anybody's territory, then you'll be able to go and declare war on them for superiority, a superiority war goal. And that war goal will not give you a massive stability hit anymore because it's including the anti-piracy casus belli in there. It doesn't have its own listed like option of anti-piracy casus belli. It just gets included and shows superiority, but it will let you do that for free, which is great if you don't have any other buffs. For example, any other war goals, anything that you can use to fight someone. It's very, very useful. Otherwise, if you are Navy heavy, then something like Ship Surgeon could be useful, but really, I think Professional Sailors is the only thing worth rushing here. Okay, this Civics. This is a woefully unappreciated technology tree by me, but I will do my best to advise you on it. So this is very important, and I especially consider the right half of this to be important. I almost never go down the left half. It can be useful, and we'll get to that. But let me start with the things I'd recommend the most. So I think you'll definitely be coming down here, because in this game, there's political influence. And if you've seen my other guides or played the game at all, you'll know political influence is very limiting early on. It only really becomes abundant towards the late game, and that's really just maybe. Like, you'll start feeling like you have enough of it then. It's going to feel very rare early on, and you can have your characters try to get you more through character actions, but even then you won't have enough for a lot of the game, and that's what the right half of this right half is really good for. So if you come down here to hypo cost, then you'll get a 5% bonus to monthly political influence. Further down in cultural administration, another 10% bonus to monthly political influence, plus pop assimilation speed, and that's really useful. And then if you go all the way down to servile bondage, another 10%. These are very, very valuable techs, to the point where I would definitely say it's worth going through all these other things, although I don't think they're very useful. Promotion speed, Freeman output, Unintegrated culture happiness. After the very beginning of the game, this is going to be basically useless. These are very minor buffs compared to what you're getting out of these influence bonuses. And then, if you are mercenary heavy, mercenary benefits can be worth going for, especially in tandem, you know, with that professional sailors I pointed out earlier. Otherwise, the only other thing here that I'd really consider to be worth going for, even though I almost never go for it, is down here. Either urban or rural planning. And that basically means if you are not playing very city heavy, then you can essentially make all settlements double what they can build. Instead of one building slot, they get 2. It's great if you're playing a barbarian with minimal cities, I suppose, but I don't personally ever use this. It is inferior, in my opinion, to urban planning, where you get 5% money saved on buildings, 5% more pop capacity everywhere, plus 2 global building slots, so 2 more slots instead of 1, but it's in a city, so some of those buildings are worth less, but still. Some pop promotion speed, which is meh, but 5% global monthly food modifier. By the way, if you're city heavy, this is a no-brainer. Even if you're only tiptoeing into cities, this is generally going to be a lot more useful than rural planning. I think rural planning is a lot more niche for tribes and whatnot, but definitely I'll narrow it down. These are both worth really going for, especially urban planning. So other than the influence, I'd recommend going for urban planning, but your priorities will probably be vastly different enough as time goes on that whether you get here at all is kind of dependent. There's some other nice buffs along the way. Slave output is important, much more important than these other outputs we were looking at over there. Build road cost reduction, that's really nice. Now over here, if you go into this, it's because of some very specific reasons. There's useful text here, very useful in fact, but I almost never reach a point in any game where I think, oh, I really need something here. I almost never hit that. There's amazing money boosting things here. You could raise your import value, get more import routes. There's a fucking discipline bonus in here. National commerce income. And again, wage reduction for characters. You get +1 happiness to everybody. Temporary office. It literally grants you threshold for civil war increase. This is amazing when you're late in the game. It's amazing when you're late in the game. +4 local building slots for a specific city. And 10% tax income, more tax income, and it keeps going, it keeps going. Look at all this income increases. And then towards the end here, there's these 2 techs that will grant you these buildings, if you get to them, that are incredible. Granting these modifiers to specifically where they go, but they're very good buildings. And look at this, 25% research efficiency total, like maximum. That's amazing. That's awesome. And some capital import routes. These are all very useful things. I think this is probably the most balanced tree or branch of all of them, where basically the entire tree is extremely useful generally, but there are things that are just more situationally useful that I feel like you'll never go down this path. By the time that threshold for civil war is useful, you'll be so far in, you won't have the time to get it anymore, you know? And by the time you would actually get to any of these buffs right here, you've probably collected so many other buffs and you're so far in the game anyway that they become not as impressive. All the money that you can get here is still pretty good, but it's very gradual. There's no specific tech that stands out that you rush towards that gives you amazing benefits. They all just give you good benefits along the way. So very useful, but nothing here I would actually recommend rushing. But nothing I would recommend against either, like how I pointed out the uselessness of so many other things over here, for example. So leave this one more up to your prerogative, but those are the things that you can look out for. Now, Oratory. This one is a favorite of mine. Let's go over why it's a favorite. Because this one also has some monthly political influence bonuses on the right here. And while you're getting them, you're going to be getting most of the loyalty, like generic loyalty benefits from research you could get. +2 from loyalty, legal patronage, and then you come down to town criers, 10% monthly political influence. This is usually where I go to get my political influence, like first and foremost. Then you work your way down this right side some more. I'd recommend the right side usually just because it's faster. And then you can get down here to Approved Familia, +4 loyalty to all characters, until you walk your way down to Petronium, which is not too difficult because you could just come down left or right side to get to it. This is 25% to monthly political influence. This is almost all the political influence you would have gotten from the Civics tree in one go. And you're going to get another 10% up here as well. and another +2 loyalty to characters. Loyalty becomes so important later on that this side right here is like unskippable in my opinion. I see a lot of like Steam discussion posters and commenters complaining that, oh, Civil War is so difficult, blah, blah, and none of them ever went down this side. This is one of the first things I go down all the time. Like, this defines my early or mid-game research right here. It's just going from legal patronage down the right side, all the way down to patrocinium. I can't say these names. Also, other useful things here. Military patronage and the things above it. You know, you have access to more loyalty and corruption reduction, which is very rare and very useful for keeping your monthly costs of payments down and keeping not loyalty, like it might also still be called loyalty. I forget right now. Yeah, province loyalty high. So preventing rebellion. So you're not only preventing civil wars in this one part of the tree, you're preventing rebellions as well through this. And even down here, this one is, more dependent. It really kind of just depends if you are a republic. If you're playing a republic, this side's very useful. You can demand or request a line of succession. Basically, this allows you to become a dictatorship, and this is how republics can work down the way to becoming an empire, for example, abandoning their democratic values. And it comes with monthly political influence bonuses. So that's pretty useful as well. There are some nice things here like pop cap from census data, but I usually don't go for it, honestly, because there's usually bigger fish to fry. But that's what to look for over here. Over here, there's some very useful things. In fact, there's some things on the left side of this that are absolutely vital to doing a world conquest run, but you really have to go out of your way to get them. And if you try to get them naturally as things pop up that you need to attend to, you're probably not going to get to that stuff until the end of the game. Now, there's a lot of really good things here to go for. So if you're playing heavily with vassals, which I don't personally do, but I've seen some talk about it, including some that I play with, then over here is pretty useful. You get more tribute income, increase subject opinion. Very useful if you're very subject heavy to come down this side towards aggressive protection. Additionally, you could get down here to mercenary reliance, very useful for someone like Carthage. Get 2 more maximum mercenary armies, and they cost 5% less to maintain at the debuff of national manpower. If you're not going levy heavy, you're going merc heavy, this is perfect. This is something you don't want to miss. However, you know, once you have it, and you're gonna have to live with these. And there's some war score costs if you want to take more territory in one go. This is a good path to go for. If you're going for a world conquest, this is definitely a good path to go down, because it'll also lead down this way, which leads to important things such as symbolic victory, where you get more war score cost reduction, which then leads to winning land by the spear, which unlocks Imperial Challenge, which is a war goal where if someone's at least a major power rank, and let me see where I see that, which is 100 to 499 territories, or, you know, above, just 100 plus, then you could declare a war on them, kind of like the Legacy of Alexander, but it doesn't really expire, where if I walk up and I besiege this, then when I take it, it's immediately mine. I get the aggressive expansion related to it right then and there, and the war actually will end based on success in battles, but territory will be conquered immediately upon taking it. It doesn't have to be acquired in a peace deal later. This is very important for conquering if you want to conquer the whole map, because the map is big and the timeline is short. I scrolled past it, but this is actually my favorite part of this line right here, is proportional agreements. This is really useful if you're trying to expand using vassals, but slowly. Basically, if there's a neighboring nation, once you have this, that has less than 12 territories, not 12 or less, less than 12, so 11 or less. I wish they wrote it more like that, because highlighting this in blue is very confusing. If they have 11 or less, and they border you directly, territory to territory, then you guarantee them, then there's a small chance over time that they just become your subject. Whether that's a client state or tribal vassal, depending on their form of government. And this is a good way to amass vassals without having to go to war and attack them, which can save you a lot of money, save you a lot of time, save you a lot of headache if you prefer to not go to war all the time. Give you a lot of time to build yourself up, yet still be expanding. Comes with a one-time 50 political influence buff, which is very useful at the beginning of the game as well. And boosts tribute income and gives you +3 diplomatic reputation, which will really improve how others see you. And I don't want to skip over it, so we'll take a look over here at bookbinding. There's a very easy to get to maximum research efficiency bonus that is not something you want to miss right here. Definitely not. And then on the way to proportional agreements is how you get the Grand Theater building, which is very useful for buffing the happiness of anybody that is already in your integrated culture. But not only that, it's, in my opinion, it's up there with a foundry for like most important building. It'll assimilate non-integrated pops faster and give a 0.05 additive to territory provincial loyalty, which is actually massive. And all these things combined, yeah, this is up there with Foundry. At this point, we've covered like 3 of the most common things I go for early on, and that's literally like professional training, maybe some supply, blacksmith's apprentices, like that's what I try to get out of the military. And then I'll usually go for all the loyalty, political influence as well. And I'll definitely go down to proportional agreements. These are like my most important things that I go for. Everything else I kind of just chip away at as I need it. And this tree right here is the epitome of chipping away at it as you need it. Kind of like the left side of Civics, but with religious, it's all one big tree and there's actual goals you would go for here as well, instead of just having the little buffs. Now, early on, the gains you could get at the very beginning are actually rather large. Ruler popularity gain can be very useful, especially if you're using ruler popularity to accumulate more political influence. Unintegrated culture group. Note the group word here. Very important. Happiness. If you're conquering and not integrating it like everybody you see, right? Very important. This will make all those barbarians you're taking over as Rome happier and less likely to rebel. Very, very useful for a warmonger. Integrated culture happiness, good, just generally, I guess, but also if you're integrating very much. Provincial loyalty is nice. More popularity gain. Slave happiness is very useful for the same reason that unintegrated culture group happiness would be. There's a 10% like monthly food modifier here, you see? More popularity gain and divine sacrifice cost reduction. This is amazing, this beginning thing right here, and then it just kind of keeps going from there. You have corruption reduction down here that you could go for as well. I usually recommend going for this. And then if you go further down, there's even more of it. 0.03, that's actually massive, and a bunch of popularity gain as well. You get some research efficiency and some global monthly food modifier down this side as well. On the left side, you can unlock the Great Temple, which is the religious equivalent to the Grand Theater, but it's less useful overall. But it's pretty nice for buffing up your happiness of integrated religions, and religions are way more likely to end up integrated than cultures are. So this could be a good way to get more happiness as well. Minor syncretism, more unintegrated culture group happiness, very, very important as well. Research efficiency, very important. After that, I don't usually go down this side very much, but there's a couple things you could go for. You want to be very careful about getting this one. Be very careful. You know, minor syncretism, very good. Major, you're going to lose 90% of your pop conversion speed for religion, but make everyone that's unintegrated culture group way happier. That's right. You are trading religious conversion for culture happiness. While it sounds good on paper, if you could make do without this, I would recommend that you make do without this, because there's other things like this that can buff country same religion happiness, for example, and other things that can buff, for example, if you look at that Great Temple, state same religion happiness plus 10%. Like, there's so many other ways to buff the happiness of your state religion that having everyone not be the same religion, which would also debuff your state religion pantheon deities, by the way, it isn't worth it, if you ask me. But if you really need that culture stability, it's an option, so I'll still point it out. And then otherwise, auxiliary recruitment is nice. You get some manpower, levy size multiplier. This is good for your total army size, even for legions, by the way. And maximum mercenaries army, good for someone like Carthage. But then beyond that, I mean, the things down here are nice, but I don't know if you'll ever get these in the time span of the game very easily. Like, your research is limited to some extent, as we've discussed in the tutorial, the guide on research, by what time it is, by what year it is. And so you'll never have enough for everything. And I've personally never had enough to really bother going all the way down here more than once. It's just not really worth it. But those other ones, very good to look at. So those are all the things I would recommend rushing. Those are things that you could look out for rushing, and those are things that you could gradually chip away at. Those are all my recommended things after playing hundreds and hundreds of hours of this game. I don't even know how much. I've been playing this since launch on Xbox Game Pass, and I eventually got it on Steam as well. So those are my recommendations with the experience I have with the game. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope these tips have been useful to you. If you have any other tips you want to recommend to anybody, anything you'd like to dispute or contest or ask questions about, feel free to leave comments about that. If you want to see any other guides or even maybe tip videos, sorts of guides like this, feel free to leave that suggestion in the comments below as well. For now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.